Welcome. Let's write equations of circles in standard form. We want to get this equation that we have here and manipulate it so that it looks like the standard form of the equation of the circle. Because once we have it in this form, then we can identify the center of the circle at the values of h and k, and we can identify the radius of the circle at the value of r. So how do we make that happen? Notice that in the equation of the circle, the first term is the result of completing the square on x, and in our equation, the second term is the result of completing the square on y. So we want to do that to our equation. We're going to be completing the square on the variable of x and also on the variable of y. So let's start by organizing our equation. All those terms that have a variable, let's put it on one side and all the constants on the other. On the left-hand side, notice that every single term has a variable on it. And on the right-hand side, notice that the second term also has a variable on it. So we need to move this to the left-hand side. Let's do that by adding y squared to both sides. And notice that we have achieved our objective. On the left, we have all the variables, and on the right, we just have the constant. Let's organize the left-hand side of our equation. Those terms that have an x on it, let's write it in standard form. So we can write that down as x squared plus 8x. And those terms with a y on it, let's do the same. Let's write it in standard form. Y squared minus 2y. The right-hand side, let's just bring that down. And this will always be the form that we want to write this down. All the x's are next to each other, and we go from highest to lowest exponent, and all the y's are next to each other, going from highest to lowest exponent. Now we need to check if the leading coefficient of x squared and y squared is of 1, which it is. Notice that there's no number in front of x squared or y squared. Now we can start the process of completing the square. Let's start by completing the square on the variable of x. Let's get the number that is in front of x. And let's perform two procedures to it. Let's start by dividing by 2. And then we're going to square our result. Let's keep this value of 16 on the side. We're going to use it in a second. Now, let's complete the square on the variable of y. Let's get the number that is in front of y, which is -2. And let's do two operations to it. Let's divide by 2. And the result, let's square it. Now let's use the results that we have gathered. The value of 16 will complete the square on the variable of x. So let's add that value right next to the variable of x's in our equation. And the value of 1 will complete the square on the variable of y. So let's add that value right next to the variables of y in our equation. Now let's bring down the value of 64 on the right-hand side. And because we added 16 on the left, we should do that to the right as well. And because we add the value of 1 on the left-hand side, we should do that on the right as well. Now let's understand what we have done. If we concentrate on the first three terms, notice that we can factor out this equation. We are looking for two numbers that if you multiply gives you 16, and those two same numbers, if you add them up, gives you 8. Notice that those numbers is 4 and 4, which is the value that we square when we were completing the square for x. So the first three terms, we can write it out as x plus 4 times x plus 4, which is the same as x plus 4 to the second. We have completed the square for the variable of x. Now, if we look at the next three terms, notice that we can factor this out as well, because we will be looking for two numbers that if you multiply, it gives you 1, and if you add them up, it gives you -2. And those two numbers are -1 and -1, which notice that that's the value that we obtained when we were completing the square on y. Just for the variables of y, we can write it out as x minus 1 times x minus 1, which is the same as x minus 1 squared. And on the right hand side, when we combine those terms, that gives us 81. Notice that the result that we got, it looks a lot like the equation of the circle. When it comes to the variable of x's, notice that there's a minus between the x and the value, so we need to reflect that in our equation. So instead of writing this number as positive 4, we're going to write it as subtraction of negative 4. When it comes to the variables of y, notice there's a minus between the y and the number. We have that in our equation, so there's nothing to modify. And on the right hand side of our equation, we need to write down our result, the second exponent. Well, notice that 81 is 9 to the second, so instead of writing 81, we're going to write that 9 to the second. So now we have the standard form of the equation of a circle, where the center is at the location of h, k, and in our equation, h has a value of negative 4, that's the number that we are subtracting, and k has a value of positive 1, that is the value that we are subtracting. So we can say that we have our center at negative 4, 1. And to define the radius of the circle, we need to think about what's the number that we raise to the second, which in this case, it is 9. So we have completed our objective.
Hello, if you would like to continue learning about mathematics, you can check out the videos on the left.